yes, we are live. This is Magic Mondays. I'm your host, Neil D'Souza. Of course, I'm also the host of the Leadership to Wealth podcast, and owner of Ontario Private Mortgages. But I don't do this show alone. I've got two wizards of Ontario real estate. One of those wizards is my co-host, Jason Baz.
Hello, everybody. The wizard is here.
And then, of course, we've got our other co-host, the man, the myth, Marlon Yee, man.
What's up, everybody? What's up? Happy Monday. Let's go.
Happy Monday. Let's go. All right, guys. Well, I hope you guys have had a great weekend, and I hope you guys caught last week's show because on last week's show, we were talking about rent to own, and we had Mark Vasilius come on and teach us about that. Now, I want to point out something. So last week, Jason, you actually were, I caught you were taking notes on the show last week.
Definitely. You know, it's important, and the audience should definitely take note of this. Whenever we're learning something new and we're trying to sharpen our skills, it's important. You got to take notes. Myself, I never leave home without a notepad, and I'm always scribbling into it. If I see something that I don't know about that I need to research at a later time, I make sure to make a note of it. And on my downtime, I look those things up. And you know, Mark Vasilius, he was just a plethora, like a cornucopia of knowledge there that really got the gears turning. A lot of my followers did mention that to me as well. That it made you look at rent to own very differently.
Yeah. Well, listen, what I want to really, guys, obviously you can go back and watch last week's episode of Rent to Own, Magic Mondays, talking about rent to own with Mark Vasilius. But I really want to point out, Jason, I thought that was amazing. You kind of taking notes there because, so many people can close themselves down, right? And like maybe I'm too far to take notes, but here you are, one of the wizards of Ontario real estate, and even you're taking notes. So I thought that was pretty,
of course,
rock solid. So that's amazing. Marlon, what did you think about last week's show?
I think it was a great show. I definitely recommend. If you missed that episode, it's one of our better ones in terms of knowledge. And a lot of people don't know about rent to own, and I definitely recommend any realtors out there who, are looking for something to add to their tool belt to help their clients. Mark and his company Core Real Estate seem to be very solid, and I think in the coming months, rent to own is going to be a big solution for a lot of people. And so I definitely recommend everyone to learn a little bit about it because it's here to stay. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think rent to own has had a place in the market for a number of years for sure. And there are definitely cycles, times when it's better, times when other things are available, other tools are available, but we're definitely seeing the need for rent to own in our market so that people can obviously get those dreams of home ownership. Now, this week, we're actually going to be talking about property management. So I'm looking forward to it. But we said we're going to talk about some property management nightmares. Maybe our producer can get some like scary vibes going down. If not, I suppose you can just look at me. But okay, property management nightmares. Why don't I start off? I think one of the first things that I've had for property management nightmares is when I was actually moving provinces, and I had my rental property, and just as I moved, my tenant decided they want to move. So I switched provinces. And my tenant from another province says, "Hey, I want to move." Okay, great. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? So I bring in a new tenant. Now, of course, I'm too worried about trying to move my family and settle in our new location back in Ontario. And what did I get? You guys know it. I got a dud. And they came in. They paid rent for about 3 months. And then they, missed a payment. They caught up, missed a payment, caught up, and then just stopped paying. And then, of course, the next number of months, I was just paying the rent and or paying the mortgage, and they weren't paying me anymore. And I actually had to do a strategy called cash for keys, where I literally had to pay them just to leave. So that was a hit to the pocketbook, having to pay those thousands of dollars for the tenant and for the mortgage, and then on top of that, having to pay for them to leave. So that was a bad one. It took me a little while to recover from that. Jason,
Wow.
do you have a nightmare for us?
Whew, plenty of nightmares. Keeps me up at night. We run into this a lot of the times. Many a times it's people trying to do things themselves. They cut corners. Most recently, I had a client of mine who had a condo. I helped them purchase a condo. Everything was good. And then after the fact, they had decided to rent out the condo. So they found their own tenant, put it through, and person had a slew of excuses for why their credit wasn't good, why their income didn't really match up, but whatever. My client ended up taking a chance on them. Lo and behold, we're fast forward about a year. Client calls me up saying, "Hey, Jason, I want to sell the condo." Well, where we ran into it is the tenant wasn't happy with that, on the simple fact that they felt like, hey, we're getting pushed out of our place, but due to financial reasons, the client had to sell the place. This tenant, we're talking, they stopped paying rent. Like that's, I think every tenant nightmare starts with they stop paying rent. So no rent's been paid for about 3 to 4 months, and then to make matters worse, when we were trying to sell the place, they had everybody home, and this is in the middle of the pandemic. No masks, no nothing. Kids had crayon drawings all over the walls. Like they completely trashed the place. And then because the tenant thought he would be wise, he thought like, hey, if they don't sell the place, I don't have to move. So he'd stay there and just badmouth the place, saying, "Oh, nothing works in this place. The water shuts off randomly," just making up stories out of thin air. And I'm calling and getting feedback from agents, and I'm like, "What the heck?" So lo and behold, we finally got them out. Took a long time, and we were able to sell. But it was very costly to the landlord.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
But you gotta love the crayon on the wall.
Crayons on the wall, and it's one thing for the kids to do something, but like clean up after your kids.
Okay, so let's we're going to bring in our guest today, and just for you guys, our guest today is the owner of Heart Home Property Management, and I'd like to bring in Matthew Goddard. Matthew, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Glad to have you on the show today. And we've been telling some of our nightmare stories, and I think Marlon might actually have a nightmare story here just to share before we kick into getting you to kind of give us some feedback and learning about property management. Marlon, you had a nightmare story that you wanted to share?
Yeah, fortunately for me, it's not one of my tenants, but obviously I work with a lot of pre-construction realtors and people that kind of property manage for their clients. So during COVID, you couldn't really kick anybody out of the house. For whatever reason, this tenant decided not to pay for 6 months. So obviously these realtors, it was their own property actually. So, they did their own due diligence, but you just never know, right? They didn't pay for 6 months. And when they went in, there were holes in the wall. The washroom was all scummy and dirty. I think just dishwasher was broken, a whole lot of disorder. And I was curious, what happens in these situations? Obviously they covered the rent. They were just happy to have that person leave. But that's definitely a nightmare in my eyes. I don't want to pay 6 months rent for my own property. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Matthew, you've been a property manager for many years. Can you tell us a little bit about you, Heart Home Property Management, and a little bit about your background and what got you into property management?
Sure. So, I've been sort of working property management and construction and all these kind of real estate adjacent type of things for many years. So it was opportunity. It was just a fluke opportunity that kind of got me into the position I'm in from running a construction company beforehand. But I was doing maintenance and learning how to manage a high-rise down here in Ottawa. And sort of through that learning experience, I was able to kind of did my own thing and started Park Home Property Management. So we now manage properties on the East Coast and some projects here in Ontario as well.
Okay. How many units was in that high rise?
So we had like 300 units there.
Oh, man.
And then on occasion, there would be some requirements to, on-call duties, some kind of requirements to look after some other buildings as well at the same time. So,
yeah. Well, that's pretty amazing, because the reality is that most real estate investors, it's pretty rare to have 300 units, and you got direct experience dealing with 300 units. Luckily, you didn't have to take the risk at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to sort of learn through fire, trial by fire. I guess is a good way to put it. Go from 0 to 300 units, which, you have 300 case studies, 300 individuals of the population, and you see all kinds of interesting characters and some great tenants, some less great tenants, and all that kind of jazz. So, I mean, it's really steep learning curve, but it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I definitely want to hear about any nightmare stories that you might have, but do you want to comment at all about any of our nightmare stories, or do you want to just get into talking about some of the stuff you've dealt with?
I mean, both you guys have kind of touched, or you've all touched on some of the main genre of horror stories from tenants, where you have no payment of rent and you have all your damages. That's everyone's worst case scenario, right? And I wouldn't say it's common, but it's definitely not uncommon. And it's one of those risks that, being a property manager, being a landlord, that you really have to learn to mitigate. But yeah, we've seen it all. So
yeah. Okay, so you're now going to give us some tips about property management, just some of your wisdom for those people out there that own real estate, that own rental properties, income properties. Can you share with us some of that wisdom? What do you got?
All right. I got Matt's hot rules for property management.
Matt's hot rules. Here we go.
Hot rules. Here's the hot take.
Okay.
Rule number one, usually when I start to tell people that are getting into real estate, it's that you have to recognize that your tenants, while that might be your property, that might be your house or your building or whatever the case may be, it's the tenant's home. And that's rule number one to always remember, is that the tenants are the ones that live there. And so it's their home that you need to respect.
It may be
there's limits to everything. You still have to be respectful, but if they're burning your house down, then yes, that's something to deal with. But it's very important to recognize that respect and security, privacy of someone's home, right? You don't live there, they do. So that's rule number one. So
so you're saying it may be your house, but it's their home. And what's the from a property manager standpoint, what is that distinction, and what's important about noticing the difference between the two?
It's a bit of a mindset thing, and I mean, you can maybe not recognize that and still be a nice, good person who's respectful and everything like that. But there's kind of another layer to that when, let's say someone says, or most provinces, you require 24-hour notice to your tenants. Sometimes people say, "Oh, that's no problem. You could just call me an hour ahead. That's okay." Other people say, "Yeah, no, 24 hours exactly." You have to respect that. You wouldn't want to have you sitting on your own couch, eating a bowl of Cheetos, watching some TV, and all of a sudden some plumber for something you called about 2 weeks ago comes bursting in your door with no notice or anything like that, right? That's kind of the practical part of it, is just recognizing someone's right to privacy and right to enjoy living where you're living without, you know, your landlord just knocking on the door, busting in, and you know, there to fix a light or something like that. Like, you just have to recognize it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure as a property manager, you've probably, even when it's scheduled, you've probably walked into people's homes, and you mentioned about privacy. You've probably walked in on some
Yeah, I mean,
unfortunate circumstances.
you meet all types of people.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I've found a lot of older men just that live by themselves and enjoy to live in their underwear or something. You know, like they're home, birthday suit time, and you don't have to worry about anything. Even if they schedule you to come in, they sometimes forget, and you get a full show. But you know, it's their house, and you know, you'd be very polite, respectful, and tell them you come back. When the need arises. But yeah, you get to see all kinds of interesting things. I mean, there's something to be said about. I've been into hundreds and hundreds of people's homes, right? I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people in their pajamas, sitting on their couch, relaxing. You know, like on their phone or just watching TV. And so, yeah, there's just something there that the normal person doesn't get to see that. You gotta have to, you know, be respectful of that person's space.
Yeah, actually, that's really interesting, is because that person is at home, they're relaxed, they have their privacy there, and even as an investor, you've got to, because it's business to us, you have to be able to be respectful. I really appreciate that. That's really good. And unfortunately, or fortunately, you've walked in on people in their birthday suit. But okay, anything else about full frontals? I mean, about rentals that you want to talk about there? With it's their home. Anything else on that point?
You know, it's important to have great curb appeal on your building, and yeah, the number one rule is to just be respectful of your tenant and recognize it's their home.
Got it. Got it.
You know.
Yeah, got it.
I can elaborate on different stories, but you know, let's be.
And moving on, number two. Rule number two.
Use your imagination.
Yeah,
it's probably correct. And yeah. But anyway, that'd be rule number one. We go to rule number two if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, good. We'll go with rule number two being the value in budgeting, but also being critical and not just delaying something because I'm budgeting for this in the future, but really you're just deferring maintenance and not taking care of your property. So it's be mindful of budgeting and the trappings of that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So coming from a construction sort of background and contractor background, I'm very well aware of a building, like of the physical being of the building, how it's constructed, the weaknesses of the building and stuff like that, at least to the best of my knowledge. And with that comes the recognizing that you can budget for improvements and repairs and everything, and you have to budget for them, but you can't lean on that budgeting as an excuse to just defer something that needs to get done, because with time, like nothing gets fixed with time. Things only like degrade further with time. And if you don't address it sooner, your $1,000 repair can easily become a $10,000 repair. So like very easily. And,
have you seen that happen?
Yeah, I mean, and it's sometimes unintentional, and sometimes it's like people hedging their bets, like, oh, it'll probably be good for another month, might be good for another month. and then it's not good and they weren't prepared. Or sometimes, you kind of recognize something might be a problem, but you don't know what it is. But you don't go and investigate. You say, oh, I'll get to that later. And then it's not good anymore. And usually most of these issues revolve around water. Because with a building, water is the number one nemesis. So, but yeah, so.
What do you see as the number one thing that people procrastinate when it comes to getting repaired? Is it like water tanks or tubs or something like that? What do you see?
I would say it's probably usually a leak in a drain somewhere. Often it'll be leaks like in your tub can be very common sometimes, or your toilet, because the toilet has a wax seal on it, and those tend to go. That's kind of like a wear product, and so just not addressing concerns that you can see. You can usually tell when something's leaking very easily, but it's also easy enough to disregard that and just say, oh no, it's fine. Yeah, that's from something else. When really, it might not be, right? And those kind of leaks, especially drain leaks, very easily turn into the big nasty M word. And that's something
mold.
Yeah, mold. Something that tenants, pretty much a curse word in their apartment. You don't want to be saying the word mold in someone's house. So it's definitely concerning. It can be if you don't address it. Yeah.
Okay, what's tip number 3?
Number 3, well-defined lease makes expectations and ease. That's number 3. And halfway rhymes. But no, number 3 is about outlining what your expectations are in your lease. So it's actually been really great over the last maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe not even that long. A lot of the provinces have started to institute mandatory lease templates. And often accompanying those mandatory leases or standardized leases is usually some sort of reading material for tenants that comes directly from that province's landlord-tenant board. And that's been a godsend. It provides bullet point and situational based information for the tenants. And as a property manager and landlord myself, everybody's on the same page and communication's been done, then everybody just has a more pleasant time working with each other, living with each other. So, and it's up to the property manager and the landlord to make sure that they have outlined what their expectations are within that lease. So, that's it in paper. That's not disputable, essentially, as long as it's not discriminatory or anything like that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, rule number 4.
Remembering to keep professional boundaries between your tenants. Usually, it happens with large property management companies sometimes where, you try to, the policies are in place to prevent favoritism or anything like that. But even more so for smaller landlords who are self-managing, you have 4 single-family homes. That first tenant that you got 10 years ago, like he's pretty much like your buddy now, which is fine. But what that means is that in a situation where something happens in his life and then he maybe doesn't start paying rent, and he's your buddy anyway. So does he really need to pay rent? Because you go golfing together, and there was a leak, but he fixed it himself, but really caused more damage in the house. But you go golfing together, so what's the big deal, right? Your kids play together all the time, and there's nothing wrong with being friendly with tenants, but there has to be some kind of boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, things are kind of situational, but you do have to have some kind of boundaries, you know?
Yeah. Well, I can definitely say that I've made that mistake, and I had tenants for quite a number of years, several years, and then at the later stages, because we had now gotten to know one another so well, they thought that they should be able to just buy the property because they had now paid me X amount of rent for all these years, that it should just convert to like a rent to own situation. And like, hey, we paid your mortgage for all these years, you might as well sell it to us and give us credit for all of those years of rent. And so your point is very valid.
Yeah. And some people have that mentality anyway. I've seen tenants that they've paid rent for X amount of years, and they're joking when they're like, "Oh, we pretty much own this building," but they're not really joking. That's kind of how their mentality.
It's how their mind. Yeah, it's definitely how their mind is.
It's definitely on their mind, that sort of over amount of ownership. Like, you do live here and it's your home. We recognize that, but the bills were paid. Your money wasn't just put in our pockets and now we give you the building. That's not how it works.
Well, the other thing I want to just quickly touch on, and just kind of adds on to the whole professional boundaries aspect, is I think this is where a lot of landlords, the lines get blurred. They, like, for example, I've managed a couple properties for my clients, and what we did is I would get a call, I would get a text at night. I'm like, okay, I'll see you in the morning. I find that when it's someone else's home, they might get in the car, drive throughout the night, get to the property, see to it right there and then. They think that they're showing them good customer service, but really you're kind of showing, hey, I'll bend over backwards for you. Now, that being said, okay, if a pipe bursts and it's like flooding, obviously you got to kind of see to it right away. However, like small little things, being a little too available, getting a little too chummy with people, I can see that being an issue. I think most recently what we saw was when they had the mortgage deferrals come out during the start of the pandemic, a lot of tenants felt like, well, you can defer the mortgage, so I should be able to defer my rent. Which wasn't.
But I mean, that's not, necessarily sound business practice for most cases. So, and they're like, well, if you can do it, so you might as well do it, and I don't have to pay rent because I don't feel like paying rent. I'd rather get or maybe they don't, they can't, but you leave yourself kind of open to that, almost like an added layer of liability, right? Where they become too custom. They get maybe a little pushy. Honestly, I'm a bit not victim. I do this too. Like, I'm guilty of this because some of my first tenants that I have, they have my personal cell phone number, which is great, but I almost always answer my personal cell phone number.
Right.
So, they're calling me at 6 o'clock on a Saturday to ask me a random question. And I answer it, and I'm too available to them. And I really shouldn't, but they have my number and I answer my phone, and then that's what ends up happening. So even myself as a professional, I have to check myself every now and then.
So Matt, we've got a question live here from Ken Gibner. Thanks, Ken. And his question is: given the destabilization of the middle class, the inevitable inflation value of the dollar, how do you suggest landlords protect themselves? So, what is he referring to there with landlords?
I'd like to jump in on this one here.
Yeah.
Ken, thank you so much for the question. I think where it really boils down to is, like, obviously we get ourselves stuck in situations where we rented out a property and then you've got a tenant that's not paying you. You're undergoing a lot of stress, and obviously you're talking about the middle class. You might not have that income to cover the rent. So that's how do we protect ourselves? For me, I've been extremely strict on my tenant selection. I write down a system. I write down a tenant profile of what I'm looking for. Anyone that applies, if they miss one of those things, automatically denied. Because of this, it takes me on average a month to 2 months to find a tenant. However, I see great success by going that route. Now, again, if you've got a 300 unit building like what Matt's used to managing, that may not work. For me, I'm dealing with a lot of single family homes, duplexes, and triplexes, where you can kind of take your time with a lot of these things. But to answer your question, I would say, hey, take your time, make sure they fit your profile. And one of the good things right now is Ken probably knows about this, but the real estate market is extremely booming. It's booming right now. What that's done is that a lot of buyers have been priced out of the market, and they've now converted to AAA tenants. We're talking about tenants with 700 credit scores, good incomes, down payment, so they can pay you the first and last. You don't have to worry about that. So there is a silver lining right now, and as long as you wait it out, and as long as you provide a good product, you'll be able to retain those people. So I think that's how we will protect ourselves as landlords. A, take your time in finding a tenant, and B, make sure your product is good.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Vaz, Wizard of Ontario Real Estate. Okay, well, Matt, let's go. Ken, thank you for your question, and Matt, let's get rule number 5.
Rule number 5: have emergency procedures and have a contractor list on hand. The last thing you want to do is take 3 days to get back to your tenant about a flooded basement. Be ready, because that's not fair. Again, it's their home. If your house flooded, you'd want a response right away, and you should provide that as much as you can to your tenant in an emergency, and be prepared for that. So you're not running around like a chicken with their head cut off. Have the equipment available, or have contractors who you've spoken to, who know what your expectations are for managing it. So that's rule number 5.
Yeah. Having emergency procedures. Okay. Well, guys, we've got time for one question each, and then we got to wrap up. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Let Marlon go. I've been talking too much.
Yeah, I've been pretty quiet. So, I've never used a property manager. I don't know many of my clients that do. I know some realtors that dabble in it. So, how does someone know when it's time to, hire a property manager? What do you typically see, I guess, or what are the
needs? It's not a simple question, and the real answer is it does depend. It depends on what that person's goals are and what their expectations are. If you have 4 single-family homes and a full-time job, and that's all you ever want, that's it. And you don't mind doing it, then continue doing it. If your plan is to go from 0 to 100 apartments in 1 year, well, you might want to look into getting a property manager. There's a bunch of benefits. A lot of it can be just logistical, making sure that things stay tenanted and it's good repair and safe and clean. And if you're one person working a full-time job and you want 100 apartments, you're not going to have time for that. Generally speaking, for every 50 apartments you have, you pretty much want to have at a minimum 1 full-time dedicated person. The numbers kind of vary, but as a vague benchmark, for every 50 apartments, you're probably going to want about 1 staff taking care of that. So if you're at 40 and you're not dedicating full-time hours to that, you're going to need to hire somebody because you're going to have things slipping through the cracks. And it's not fair to the tenants, and it's not a good return on your investment if you're investing. So you want to make sure you maintain that investment.
I think Matt's being really I don't know how to put it, but I would say that from an investing standpoint, you want to have a property manager usually by about 10 units, I would say, because the importance of it is leveraging. Yeah. Right? It is the leveraging factor, because unless you want to turn it into becoming a full-time property manager, you want to hand that work off so that you can get back to investing in further and further properties. Plus, there's a whole area of liability which we can talk about. But I know Jason's got a question first.
I do. So I'm a firm believer in property managers. I think you guys do a phenomenal job. I think it's a necessity. I think yeah, you can try and run things yourself for a little bit. However, you do hit a threshold where if you don't have it, you're short selling yourself. My question for you, Matt, is how do you vet a property manager? Because obviously, you got good ones like yourself, but you've also brought some really bad ones out there. And so, what are the kind of things that landlords should be asking to make sure they're getting the right people for the job?
Yeah, there's a bunch of good kind of tips that or steps that if you follow, you're bound to hedge your bets on getting a good property manager. Number one, if you don't know anybody, start with as many referrals as you can from other people, or even just reviews. Start there. Make sure the company or the person isn't shady before you even pick the phone up and talk to them. Then you can pick the phone up and do it like you almost would a tenant. Pick up the phone, try to vet them as much as you can. Sometimes make sure they manage the right kind of property for you. Do they do single family homes, townhomes, row homes, or do they only do apartment buildings? There's a difference to how their team is educated and stuff like that. And if they do apartment buildings and that's what you invest in, maybe you can see if you can walk some of the common areas with them of one of their properties. Take a look at the backyard of their property or in the back parking lot. Is it full of garbage? Is the dumpster overflowing? See how they conduct business, and then kind of take a gauge from that and try to see it. And part of hiring a property manager, there's this element of reducing your own liability. So check to see if they have like procedure manuals. What are the procedures in case of emergency? And what how do they train staff and what their procedures are? And just ask these questions. Sometimes they don't have answers to them. Sometimes, they might get back to you. I mean, that's fine. Not everybody's going to have the same procedures, but at least get an idea of what they are, if they have any. And stay away from people that don't have any procedures and just kind of wing it, because you're going to have a real rough time.
Yeah. And
that's
insurance.
Fantastic. That's not my viewers might have noticed that I was looking down and it was me taking notes because Matt, you said a couple of good things out there that I really like, and the emergency procedure is something that's I think vastly overlooked by landlords. I think a lot of us don't. Sure. That's something we don't think of at all. We see a fire alarm in there, we think we've done our job.
Absolutely. One of the things that someone doesn't even think about, like in our building, we have a salt and snow log. Every time, once it got to 0 degrees, every time it snowed, we would keep track of all the precipitation throughout the winter, chart every time it was shoveled, every time it was salted. Because an element of it is liability. It's always liability, right? You want to not only keep yourself safe, your investors safe, your investment safe, but you also want to keep your tenants safe. Exactly. If you're not being held liable, then there's a higher risk of accidents happening, right? And you want to keep those tenants safe. That's their home. You got to keep them safe.
It's not even that; it's also your biggest resource. Like, they're the ones paying you, so you got to keep them
absolutely
happy, keep them safe. They would be pretty reluctant to pay your rent if they slipped, they fell, and dislodged a hip.
Yeah, they slip and break a leg. How are they going to go to work?
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, your investment that was making X amount of money is now making this amount of money, and you can't do the maintenance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Wow, Matt, thank you so much. That's some great information. I know that there are a ton of questions that we could continue to ask about property management. For all you guys watching, of course, please send in your questions. We'll get Matt to answer those questions if you have more questions about property management. But on behalf of Jason and Marlon, Matthew, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It was fantastic to be with you.
And how do people get a hold of you, Matt?
They can get a hold of me on Facebook, all the kind of social media things under Matt or under Heartland Property Management or something along that lines. And I'll be scrolling the comments on this video for the next day or two. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask them.
All right. Love it. Well, guys, don't forget to like and share on behalf of Matthew Goddard, my co-host Jason Vaz, and Marlon Yee. Man, this has been Magic Mondays, Property Management Nightmares. See you guys next week.